Hello, it's GN. I'm going to do a quick video of my challenge, like a recap of my challenge win on Sunday. It's been a long time since I've won a Pauper challenge. I've had a bunch of splits, but I was actually informed that the last time familiars won a challenge, it was me, and it was over a year ago. So it's definitely been a while. Um, but yeah, I think I'm not going to go over all of the matches like I've historically done. I think it's just kind of too long, and a lot of it is just like repeated um, stuff. Since the strategy for the matchups ends up being pretty consistent. So I'll probably talk a little bit about the deck list, and then go through the replays for the top eight matches. When I was streaming the matches, I did turn on a hand hider for the top eight matches, which I understand is not the greatest viewing experience, but I think is overall um, just something that I want to do if I'm going to try to win. I don't expect that any of my opponents today would try to cheat, but I think it's a good practice to get into. Anyways, looking at the deck list first, um, it's basically the same list I normally play. Um, as far as the familiars deck, the only differences are I expected that the mono red and the glitters decks were kind of taking over, and they were sort of kicking out the Fade decks and like the more blue control decks. Um, and so what I decided to do was to cut a prohibit and cut a deep analysis, and I added a Seagate Oracle and a Prismatic Strands, and those are just in the deck to respect mono red, and to some extent Boros, but mostly just mono red. Well, I don't think the new Goblin from the new set is very good. Other people do seem to think it's good, and so I think the deck was something that I wanted to respect. And so Seagate Oracle is nice against mono red compared to Modern Age because A, it comes down a turn earlier if you play it on curve, and B, uh, it is card positive. Um, so that's nice. And then Prismatic Strands is great. Obviously, I've talked about this card before, but it's better in the pre-board games because most of the time they end the game with a Bushwhacker. And in the pre-board games, they're not going to play any relics or anything, and the games are going to be much less interactive, and they're going to try to just kill you as soon as possible. So Prismatic Strands helps a lot there, and obviously has some synergy with the Modern Age. But otherwise, this is a pretty stock version of my deck list. If you look at the sideboard, I moved the second Deep Analysis to the sideboard, which I can bring in against other blue decks or decks with lots of Pyroblasts. And then I decided not to play Dust to Dust because I didn't expect Jeskai Affinity or Grixis Affinity to be very popular, and so I ended up filling those slots with a Last Breath um, and a second Nature's Chant. And then the other thing of note is that I played a Dispel on the sideboard over the fourth Hydroblast because when I hedged my main deck against Mono Red, it made the mapping such that I have fewer cards to take out. And so I really only had three bad cards to take out, so I wanted three Hydroblast to bring in, um, assuming that my opponent wasn't doing anything super fancy with their deck. So the mapping for Mono Red was three Hydroblasts in, and then I would take out Ghostly Flicker, the Modern Age, and Deep Analysis. And like if I had another Hydroblast, I'd probably bring out the Remove Soul. But the Remove Soul ends up being pretty reasonable just because of Goblin Bushwhacker. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the matches. Okay, so this is quarterfinals. Game one, I'm on the draw against Luffy or Luffy, however it's pronounced. Who is at this point I knew he was on Grixis Affinity, um, and this hand is I think not insane against Grixis Affinity or anything, but you kind of just have to keep most hands with the land and a Chancery, and then like action. Like this is just the thing you have to keep. Um, and then if you draw a snap, like you're going to be playing from behind a lot of the time. If you draw a snap, you can sort of catapult your mana ahead of the opponent. So I did keep this. And sure enough, he's on Grixis. So I play the Ashburns on turn one. Plays a star. And then I had an interesting decision on turn 2. So I draw an island, and then I can have to decide whether or not I want to play the island. Well, so I have three main options. Either play the island and cast the Modern Age, play the island and hold up my two counterspells, or play the Chancery, like float a colorless, play the Chancery, and then cycle. And the reason I chose to do this play as opposed to any of the other plays is that, well, I don't want to play the Chancery because that forces me to go to cleanup. And this Modern Age, like, I can use the extra cardboard that I would have discarded to hand size to filter with the Modern Age. But the reason I didn't play the Modern Age here was because I had Prohibit and Remove Soul. So if they go for like a quick Mirror Enforcer, I can tag that. And if they go for a Dispute or a Wellspring, I can tag that. Like, for example, if they don't have any other lands in their hand, they're going to main phase cast a Deadly Dispute on the star. And being able to counter that and then untap, play the Chancery and then the Modern Age would be like a sequence that would be good for me here. I think out of the three matches, this was the match that I played by far the best. Um, it's worth noting here that I don't know if this is. I'm assuming this is what Luffy was doing, but you can swap phases to see if the opponent is F6 or not. But this really worked out because he spent 3 mana and I was able to trade up with a removal. And then, whoa, I'm going too fast. So yeah, when I'm playing this Modern Age, I play the Chancery first to give myself the option to discard the Ash Barrens. I decided to discard the Dawnbringer Cleric instead. The Dawnbringer Cleric in this matchup basically only destroys makeshift munitions. Occasionally you can use it to exile a card. You can occasionally use it to exile a card from your graveyard, but that isn't usually mana efficient and isn't usually a great idea, especially in like game 1. So play the Modern Age, discard the Dawnbringer Cleric, pass back, and Luffy just passes again. So types of cards that my opponent can have here now are possibly some Mirror Enforcers, almost certainly removal spells and counter spells, right? They could also have more lands. That's a possibility. Although the way they sequence their lands makes me think that's unlikely, because generally if you have these tap lands, you want to go tap land on 1 and then like play an untap land on 2. Although maybe their curve just would have been such that they didn't want to do that. So, sort of like starting to see what's in their hand. So let's see what happens here. Oh, I have to hit play. I draw, discard a land. Now here, I play the Fam out. So now I have the decision, do I want to either hold up Prohibit or cast Seagate Oracle? And if they have a Deadly Dispute, I'd really like to counter that with the Prohibit. But also it's not the most mana efficient play. So I think I decided to play the Seagate Oracle here. Which is fine. And now if they kill the Famine response, it's still fine. I got my mana discount. So I see 2 lands, nothing interesting there. So Frogmite is a card that is in my opponent's deck, is very good for me because it just gets brick walled. Like basically this is just a blank piece of cardboard. Which is definitely good for me. So I play Archaeomancer. This is a really, really good exchange for me because Archaeomancer returning Remove Soul is sort of useful, but the way that this matchup is won is by fighting over these draw twos. Like if you can fight over the early draw twos and then brick your opponent, while you're snowballing card advantage and they're not, that's generally how you win. So they cast Reckoner's Bargain in response to Archaeomancer. I don't really know why you would do this now instead of on the upkeep or something, but so I decided to counter. And that lets me pick up their Prohibit and then play an island and then have Prohibit up for their turn. So now if they play like a Wellspring or something I want to counter, I can counter that. So I do. And now I'm really far ahead because they have 3 cards and I have 3 cards, but they're like all three for ones. So at this point, I think at this point the game is mostly over, I think. Oh, and they even conceded here. Yeah. So basically you just at this point I would just draw. And they don't really have enough removal to kill these flyers because the only sweeper they have is Corkland Shaman, which only kills ground creatures. So I was definitely gonna win this game. Okay, so for game 2, I sideboarded, oh god, having to remember. So I sideboarded out Remove Soul, Snap, Ghostly Flicker, Prismatic Strands, Modern Age, Dawnbringer Cleric. And then I boarded in I boarded out 3 Faithfuls. So I must have, yeah, boarded out a lot of cards here. So I looked at my opponent's deck list. It looked like they had 4 Red Blasts that they were going to bring in, and then some Graveyard Hate, and I forget what else, like a couple Negates maybe. Um, so Prismatic Strands is actually kind of useful in game 1 when you can counter the Court Clan Shaman activations with it, but post board they're going to board out the Court Clan Shamans. So that's not as good. The Dawnbringer Clerics, like same thing. It's a similar concept. Like the makeshift munitions is a relatively important card in game 1, but the post-board games are more interactive, and so they don't really have the Grixis players don't have as much like random free artifacts to fling around. And you also you have Hydroblast to answer the munitions if you need to, but usually they'll end up boarding it out. Um, and then I boarded out Ghostly Flicker. Ghostly Flicker just ends up being win more. Like you don't really need this. You can just win with Ephemerate. And then I just trimmed on some minor stuff. The Faithfuls, I don't block. Like the reason this matchup has historically not been great, or it has historically required you to play a lot of sideboard cards, is because Godfar's Faithful can't block Mirror Enforcer or the Gear Seeker Servant. But I do like just having one in the deck to draw to. Like if I'm at a low life total, but I'm ahead in the game, I want to make sure that I can still win and just draw this and make sure I don't get Gap Blasted out of the game. Um, Pretty minor, but it's fine. And then notably, I didn't play Dust to Dust in my sideboard, so I was honestly expecting that these postboard games were going to be quite difficult. Okay, so I'm on the draw. I have to go to 6. This 6-card hand is fine. Notably, Deep Analysis is going to be one of my best cards against my opponent. I even boarded in a second copy. I guess I should go over the cards I boarded in. So I boarded in 2 Negates, 2 Hydroblast, 1 Deep Analysis, 1 Dispel, 2 Destroyable, and 1 Nature's Chant. But yeah, as I was saying, this Deep Analysis card is going to be one of the most important cards against my opponent because it's a 2-for-1 no matter what. Whereas like a card like Archaeomancer is a 2-for-1 if it resolves, but this is a 2-for-1 even if it doesn't resolve. So I bought him the Archaeomancer because that's going to be slow and worse against counter magic than Deep Analysis. Being on the draw can be tough because you can't counter their Wellspring. Like Ichor Wellspring on turn 2 is their best play, and it's also like a pretty important card. So now I'm holding up Negate in case they play Wellspring, which they decide not to. So this leads me to believe that they're playing some sort of, or that they have some sort of counter magic or something. And the fact that I have Destroy Evil means that I'm not in a super big hurry to get stuff going, because if they play out creatures, I do have at least an answer to one of them. They cast Chromatic Star. And here, I don't think I decide to cycle this. No, I do. I mean, my hand is pretty heavy anyways, so. And I just grabbed the top lane because I'm just going to be holding up these 2 cards, which is 4 mana on this turn. I'd rather not draw this. So I'm definitely going to counter this Deadly Dispute. And they didn't counter back, which means that they likely don't have a Red Blast. So now they're doing stuff. They get to draw 2, play the Blood Fountain. Now I'm kind of hoping they tap out. So they play 2 Mirror Enforcers, looks like. So I'm going to kill 1. And then once it gets to my turn, I have an interesting decision. I'm pretty sure I draw a land. So if my opponent doesn't have a Red Blast, the best, or a Galvanic Blast, or even a Galvanic Blast is fine. But if they don't have a Red Blast, the best play is to evoke Muldrifter and then Ephemerate it. And then if they try to kill the Muldrifter, I can Ephemerate it again. The downside to this is that I boarded out my Ghostly Flicker. So let's say I evoke Muldrifter, go to Ephemerate it, they Galvanic Blast, I Ephemerate again, I draw 2 cards, go to their turn, they then kill the Muldrifter and crack the Spell Bomb. I will have no Flicker effects left in my deck. Which is not like, it's not an unwinnable position, but also it's not a great position because the way that my deck wins is by Ephemerate loops. Like basically, I'd say 95% of FAM's games end with Ephemerate on Archaeomancer. So I don't love giving up the Ephemerates, but this land draw makes this play easy, like makes my decision easy because I can cast Deep Analysis and then flash it back before they have a chance to crack the Spell Bomb. And even if they have a Red Blast, this still gets a 2-for-1, which it doesn't look like they have that, although maybe they would have saved it, I'm not sure. So they get to draw 4 cards total here. The replay is lagging as per usual. Okay. So now I decided to go for the Drifter Ephemerate, which is pretty fine because if they were to Pyroblast this, then I could just do it with the other Drifter, so it's fine. And so now this is the sequence that I talked about earlier, which is overall not great because, as I said, now I'm not going to have any flickers. So I have another decision about playing the FAM versus casting Destroy Evil. But I think playing the FAM is better here just because my life total is high enough that I think developing the FAM is worth it. And at this point, like, my opponent must be pretty low in interaction just because if they let me untap with a FAM and all these cards in hand and let me rebound the Ephemerate, so I feel like they don't have removal spells. So I think this is a pretty important turn. Yeah. Okay, so I think I like sat here and tanked for a while because what I want to do, right, ideally, is kill one of these, they dispute it, I counter that, and then I can play the Archaeomancer and force them to crack this without drawing a card, right? And then I can snap one of these other creatures, preferably the Gearseeker Serpent, and then like maybe resolve some card draw, right? But let's see what I end up doing. So start with snap. So then they dispute in response. And I definitely want to target the Gearseeker Serpent because returning this to their hand would require them to spend mana to replay it. Maybe that's obvious, I don't know. So then I counter. Snap goes to the graveyard. Okay, so this is another interesting spot. So I cast Archaeomancer. So generally, when you play Archaeomancer on the stack, and there's a graveyard hate piece in play, be it a Spellbomb or a Relic, the opponent wants to crack the... It's correct for the opponent to crack the graveyard hate piece with the Archaeomancer on the stack, like right now. But generally they don't. Because, so generally what happens is the opponents who are uninformed, their Archaeomancer will resolve, it will target a card, and then they'll crack their graveyard hate, and then I can then respond to the activation of the graveyard hate within an Ephemerate, and then return whatever card I want, right? So my opponent is like, okay, I don't want my opponent to be able to do that, so I'm just going to crack it now. But they don't actually know that I don't have a third Ephemerate in my deck. And so what this allows me to do, and you'll see this, is they'll activate the Spellbomb. That'll resolve. Then I'll cast Destroy Evil. That'll go to the graveyard, and then Archaeomancer will resolve and return the Destroy Evil. So I think that I guess that you could consider that a mistake from the opponent just because they don't but they don't necessarily know that I don't have 3 Ephemerates. I guess it just depends on how well you know the familiars lists. So now my opponent has 3 cards in hand, and then they just return two Enforcers. So I feel like I'm ahead in cards, so now I just have to not die, right? So I start with Seagate Oracle. I take a Nature's Chant. So now I have 3 answers for the 3 Enforcers. But I want to get rid of at least 2 of them. So I start with Nature's Chant. That resolves. And then, okay, so here's an interesting sequence. So my opponent now can have Metallic Rebuke. Like I saw that in their deck list. So what I could do is play this Ash Barrens to play around Metallic Rebuke, right? They'll play Ash Barrens, cast Destroy Evil, target Mirror Enforcer, and they can't Metallic Rebuke. And then, because now they don't have 3 artifacts, they're not going to have Metallic Rebuke until next turn when the Frogmine untaps, or the lands untap. But in this sort of situation, you're going to be spending all your mana every turn, and so Metallic Rebuke was always going to trade for a card here, and so I did this nice like trick, quote unquote, where I didn't play this extra land so that I could use Snap to generate a mana to pay for the Metallic Rebuke. I guess it was a bit later, but okay. So I cast Destroy Evil, target Mirror Enforcer. Oh. They cast Rebuke. Now I snap my Archaeomancer. And now I have 3 mana to pay for the Rebuke. And I also got a card worth of my snap, so pretty good value. And also because I don't have my there's no more flicker effects left in my deck, I have to be snapping. Like all I have left is however many Archaeomancers I have left and however many snaps. Here I decide to play around Galvanic Blast as their one of their last two cards, and so I decided to show up with the Mold Drifter. I felt like I was far enough ahead with these three cards in my hand that I could afford to sacrifice the Mold Drifter to play around that, and also I'd seen one Galvanic Blast, so I think that was a correct play. So now I'm casting Preordained to see if I can find a counterspell to defend the Arcane-Mancer, but I find a Famine and a Mold Drifter, so I play out the Mancer, return a Snap, snap the bridge, they cast Deadly Dispute, a Reckoner's Bargain. Nothing I can do about that, really. So now I play Mold Drifter. At this point, my plan is to just slam Mold Drifters until they die, and hope that I don't die to this Mirror Enforcer. But I actually want to chump with this Arcane-Mancer because I have no flicker effects. The only way for me to trigger the Arcane-Mancer is by either snapping it or getting it back with a Mortuary Mire. And so this is very slow, but this turn I'm going to play Chancery, return Mire. Next turn I'll play the Mire, put the Mancer on top. And the turn after that I'll draw Arcane-Mancer, which will give me a removal spell for this Mirror Enforcer. It's a very long sequence, but I have no flicker effects left, so that's what I have to do. So now I'm just drifting again. Return the Mire, attack for 2. Apologies, I have a cough. So now I think I decided to triple block just because exchanging resources seems good for me when I'm this far ahead. Yep. And now the fact that they didn't play anything means I feel like their hand is mostly just either interaction or lands. At this point, I'm just going to slam my stuff until they die. And this game is pretty much over. Because they don't have a way of actually sweeping away on my creatures. Once you get ahead on board like this, it's really hard for them to come back. Yeah. And now I just have a bunch of counters. I'm going to just aggressively counter whatever they play. It's kind of odd to me. I was surprised that they had a Pyroblast. I feel like you definitely would have fought over something earlier if you had this, but it's kind of tough because like once the draw two start rolling, there really is no good target for the Red Blast. Like the first Mold Drifter is insanely good value to Red Blast because you're trading up 1 for 5 mana, but past that it's not quite as good. And now I'm just insanely far ahead. And even though there's no flickers in my deck, I can just tempo my opponent out basically. Discard a Fam, return the Mire again with a plan to jump with a Mold Drifter or jump with an Arcane-Mancer so that I can put it back on top of my deck. Dispel is nice. I can counter a Dispute or a Counterspell or whatever. And yeah, they didn't even attack because they know that I can Mire back these Arcane-Mancers, even though I have another one already in the graveyard. They blast, I counter. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but I have 2 Hydros, and they have 1 card left in hand, so they are super dead. Super dead. All right, and they concede. On to game, or the, what is it, semifinal? On to the semifinals. All right, so this is the semifinals. Oh no, that was an interesting hand. So let's see if I can actually go back. So I'm against a friend on the draw. I know he's on Bogles. So he mulligans to 6 to start. And this hand, I think, is a complete trap, especially against Bogles. Because it doesn't actually do anything. There's a couple problems. One, the Modern Age is an enchantment, so it buffs the opponent's there's a 3 mana card that counts all the enchantments on the board. So you actually don't really want to have this in play if at all possible. And then the other thing is just like, yeah, this looks like a good hand. You know, I have Faithful, Familiar, Modern Age, blah, blah, blah. But it's good lands and spells. But the problem is the way that you win this matchup was with the Dawnbringer Cleric, at least the pre-board games. The way you win is with Dawnbringer Cleric, and there's no white mana here. So even if I draw Dawnbringer Cleric, I have to draw Dawnbringer Cleric and white mana to actually win, which is just a bit too much. And like, I'm not doing anything. I'm on the draw against a deck that's like a linear kill you in 5 turns deck. This is just not going to cut it. If one of these was like if this was an Ashburns, this is a keep, 100%. But it's not. Okay, so I go to 5. So now I see, okay, so I have some stuff to buy time. I have white mana quickly. So I'm like, okay, if I draw into my Dawnbringer Cleric, then I can probably win this game. And they're on 6 cards on the play, I believe. I'm also on 6. They go to Utopia Sprawl, Commune, reveals Armadillo Cloak, plays Ethereal Armor. So here I'm like, oh shit, this is not going to end well. I'm under the gun here. So now I drop Prohibit. The problem is I can't actually ever hold this up because my opponent's card costs 3. And this is definitely one of the downsides to Prohibit, is that you can't counter cards like this. That's why we play Negate in the sideboard. And I basically determined that if my opponent had a play, in addition to the Armadillo Cloak, like if they had a pause. So if on that turn they were going to play Armadillo Cloak plus a Rancor or Armadillo Cloak plus an Ethereal Armor, I was just going to be dead. Like I was just not beating that. So I decided that I wasn't going to try to beat it because I wasn't beating it. And then on this turn, I didn't like basically my options were play an island and cast Seagate Oracle, or play a tap land and hold up Prohibit, or I guess evoke Muldrifter, but that doesn't seem very appetizing. One thing I did know that they had Ramthur in their main deck, so holding this up was nice against that, I guess. And then it also is good against the top deck Rancor, top deck Ethereal Armor. But I kind of have to hope that things go my way in these pre-board games because the pre-board games are really hard in this matchup. It's play Forest and pass. So now they have one card, and it can either be like I'm trying to think. Okay, what would they not have played? It could be ran through. It could be a land, or it could be an ethereal armor or a rancor that they're sandbagging. Right? Their hand cannot contain a 3-mana card, a 3-mana enchantment, or a creature. Well, it could be maybe a creature they're sandbagging. I kind of doubt it, but it can't be a 3-mana card because they would have played that. And so that sort of limits what they can be on here. Okay, so I draw. This is the best card in my deck, and it's like not even remotely close because I can play this and destroy the Armadillo Cloak, and then now this becomes a 3/3, so I can block with the Godfrow's Faithful. And then if I'm ever able to untap, then I have Ephemerate target this, which destroys 2 enchantments for 1 mana, which is great. So play a Cleric and pass. And so now my opponent is not an idiot, so he knows that I'm holding up mana for a reason, and so he's not going to play any cards that get countered by this. But the nice thing about that is that if we're going to play this Drago slow game, my top decks are way better than his, for the most part. Like, I have more lands in my deck, and I can actually use my mana. Like, if I have 10 lands in play, I can use all that mana most of the turns. And I just have, like, much better... the game gets much better for me going long when this is in play. And my opponent has crappy draws, like lands that don't do anything, extra creatures that don't do anything. But I don't really want to tap it. Like, I don't want to go for this Ephemerate on here because I want to sort of wait until my opponent acts first. So I know they did have a ram through, and I had a counter. So if they had a second ram through, they would probably be winning that game from this spot. But I did decide to take a little bit of risk there. I don't know what Magic Online thinks I'm doing here, but I assume I'm casting Seagate Oracle. What? There must have been some corruption or something. I don't know what happened here. But I guess I main phase just... What the Okay, well, this replay is corrupted, unfortunately. Because this is clearly not what happened. Like, I did not float mana on my upkeep and then go to my draw step. That is a bummer. But the game was mostly over once this had hit play with the Ephemerate. Yeah, that's a bummer. Okay. Game number 2. I did win that game, in case that was not clear. Okay, so post board against Bogles, it gets way better. Like, way better. Because I not only get Negate, which can counter their 3-mana cards, I get 2 Destroy Evils and 2 Nature's Chance, which can destroy your enchantments that are in play. so that's nice. And then I just end up trimming snaps because I can't snap their creatures, so the only targets are mine. And then 2 Modern Ages because, again, that grows their enchantment count. And then just 1 Faithful because it's not the most useful card ever. So I open this hand with blue and white mana and an interaction spell, which is just good enough. Like, this hand is pretty good, I'd say. Above average for sure. I think the most important thing in this matchup is that you have white mana in your opening hand, I'd say, because the important cards in this matchup are white. So my opponent leads on Abundant Growth, which rules out that they have copies of Rancor or Ethereal Armor. So I draw Dawnbringer Cleric, which is the best draw in my deck. I have to decide between playing Modern Age or, like, I have a bunch of options. I can either do Modern Age, Hold Up Destroy Evil, Faithful Preordain, or Hold Up Prohibit, but I think just developing the Fam is definitely the best play. The Gas ran through, destroy the Fam, which is fine. Like, they're not really developing their enchantments on this, so that's totally fine. I cast Preordain, bought them both. Don't find a land, but I do find another enchantment removal as well. So now at this point in the game, if my opponent doesn't kill me quickly, and I'm actually able to get these cards out of my hand before I die, I'm going to win, but also I have 2 lands, so good luck. Okay, so they cast Armadillo Cloak. I take a bunch of damage and draw Chancery, which is my best draw for sure. So then I play this, destroy the Ethereal Armor. Apologies again for the cough. Okay, so now they don't have anything, clearly, because they would have played it, because I'm tapped out. So now, okay, I played up their creature, but now they're hellbent. So now I can just pass. And I just killed both the enchantments. Killing the Rancor is obviously bad because it goes back to their hand. And then one thing that doesn't really matter but is of note, because the familiar discounts the Nature's Chant, I want to use the Destroy Evils first, because I'm not going to be destroying any enchantments. Or, sorry, creatures with toughness 4 greater or artifacts. Like, that's not a relevant thing. So, just do that. Block. Stay at 2. So now I'm basically in a holding pattern where I can't really spend my mana because my opponent can play like an Ancestral Mask and kill me. And I want to hold up this Ephemerate here, but my opponent knows that, so they're not going to play their cards. But luckily for me, the long game favors me, so if we just pass back and forth a bunch of times, it's pretty likely I'm going to top deck better than my opponent. So yeah. I do decide to play the Modern Age, which admittedly isn't great here, but I want to hold up at least 2 pieces of interaction. Which in this case is Ephemerate plus Prohibit. I think it actually would have been better to tap these 2 islands so that I could hold up Nature's Chant plus Ephemerate if needed. And then I decided to bring in the Dispel because they showed me Ram Through, and my guess is there are a lot of Ram Throughs. However, that probably is a mistake. Like, probably it's better to keep in a Snap or a Faithful or something instead. So, I guess that's probably a mistake. So they don't attack. That doesn't mean they don't have anything. Like, at this point, because I'm holding up interaction, they can now be stockpiling cards to try to beat my counterspells if they try to overload the counterspells on one turn. If I tap low or tap out or something. So I discard Lord Reveal because I want to develop my mana, and I have plenty of card advantage with the Ephemerate and the Seagate Oracle. Like, just tapping out for 5 mana doesn't seem like a thing that's going to happen anytime soon. I get a negate, so now I have lots of interaction. And so now I have to make a decision if I want to use this Ephemerate on the Seagate Oracle for card advantage and selection, or if I want to save it for the Dawnbringer Cleric. And I feel like just like developing my mana, getting a nice little 2-for-1 here is worth it. But and also notably, I decided not to cycle this on my opponent's end step because of the threat of Ram Through. I don't think it's super relevant, but it is a thing that I thought about, and I decided not to cycle there. So I find another Ephemerate, which is great, because basically this just was a draw 2. Like, it just drew me a free card. And now I feel like if I don't die on this turn, then I'm set, because I'm gonna have a shit ton of mana, so they're not gonna be able to overload my counter spells, because I'm just gonna have mana to cast everything. They don't attack, and this one I'm like, okay, they're probably dead, because now I just top deck way better than them, and this game should be over. I think I actually attack here. Maybe I don't. I don't know. Yeah, I mean it's probably incorrect to attack here, but I don't think I'm losing from this position ever, so that's what I'm saying. Like, they're going to draw 1 mana 1/1s for their draw step a decent amount of the time, so yeah. Okay, so let's see. Attack again. Drawing blanks, but this is totally fine. Like this draw go pattern, eventually, I'm going to draw an Archaimancer, and the game's going to end. I did decide not to counter this. Unfortunately, this forces me to hold back my Vector Glider, but that's not really what this game is about. Not even at all. Guess Seagate Oracle. Find a Preordain. I think I passed to hold up on my interaction, because this costs a total of 7 mana. So I hold up 7 mana. So here, I have to counter this Rancor, because if it resolves, then if I destroy it, it just goes back to their hand. So I decide to counter the Rancor. They play another Rancor. I decide to counter again. And then they play their Armadillo Cloak. Then I wait till they attack. They attack. Then I flicker this, which threatens to destroy the Armadillo Cloak, and then I'll block and kill the creature. And at that point, I can rebound the Ephemerate on here, draw some cards. Like, they're just super dead. So they can save it. Okay, on to the finals. Okay, so I'm against Selkas, who's on mono red. I played against him in the Swiss. He offered to split, but I did not because it's a good matchup. I also won the die roll, which is nice, because I did not win the die roll in the semis or the quarterfinals. This hand is really good against mono red. It could be slightly better, like if one of these was an island. But it's quite good. Like, basically what you want against mono red is cheap cards that affect the board. With Faithful obviously being the best one. Okay, so I decided to fetch an island here so that next turn I can cycle and play this Faithful out. My opponent has the best start, which is Great Furnace, Goblin Tomb Raider. So then I stick with the plan, play out the Faithful. The plan, currently I'm planning not to block. Let's see if I fall through with that. I do decide not to block. And then they can develop the Blast Runner. In retrospect, I'm not sure if this was correct or incorrect. It seems kind of close to me, because there are a lot of games where you only have one Faithful, and just like keeping it alive is worth way more than the like 2 points of life you would have lost here. But also forcing them to bolt this would mean that they don't develop this. They don't develop the Blast Runner this turn. And also if they don't have a bolt, then I just save 2 life for free. So it seems kind of close to me. So I draw Fam. Cast a Preordain. Yeah, top bottom. Then I'm going to play a Fam and pass. At this point, I think I'm blocking, because if they have a bolt, they're going to bolt the Fam. And so, like, how do I want to explain this? Like, not blocking with the Faithful doesn't get me anywhere here, because, well, A, I'm just dying. Like, this is a pretty big army of stuff, and I need to not die to it. And also, if they have a bolt, they would have probably just played this main phase 1 on here, I would guess. It's also possible they have a shock, like a Galvanic Blast that isn't turned on yet. Okay, so I draw a Muldrifter, which is the best draw for sure, because this allows me to go Fam, Drifter, Ephemerate. My draws in this last match were quite good. And now I feel like if I untap on this turn, then I win. Or like most likely win, I guess. Maybe slightly more accurate. Okay, so they bolt the Muldrifter, so don't get to rebound the Ephemerate on something useful. However, they're now out of cards, and I have blockers and stuff, so I'm at 7, so like if they don't draw Bushwhacker here, I'm in a decent spot, I feel like. So I draw Faithful, which is probably the best draw. Then I cast Preordain, gain 2 life. I see another Faithful. So I play the Faithful, cast Preordain, gain 3 life. Find a Seagate Oracle. Play the bounce land. And now I'm just like, well, if I don't die this turn, then I'm golden. So they draw. I think they thought for a bit here. So I do attack. I line up the blocks. I decided to block with the Faithfuls on the 2 power creatures and the Fams on the 1 power creatures in case they had End the Festivities in the main deck. Some of the mono red decks were running End the Festivities in the main deck. I don't know if my opponent was. I don't think so, but they decided to bolt the Faithful, which was their draw for turn. So now it's just about gaining as much life as possible. And here, I return Ephemerate, play the Plains out, and now I can use Ephemerate as a protection spell for my creatures, which is nice. They decide to attack all, I believe. Yep. I'm not really at risk of dying, so there's no reason to use this ephemerate or anything. I'm only taking 2 damage. Pretty great exchange for me. And then now I have a counterspell, so I'm free to use this ephemerate if I want to. But I decided to cast the Mold Drifter. At this point, I'm just snowballing super hard. I cycle, cast Preordain. I find a Ghostly Flicker, which is infinite life. And now, even if they have a Lightning Bolt, I can execute the infinite life combo and counter their last card. So they're dead. And they did concede. They didn't have to concede, but basically what you do in this spot is you gain a bunch of life, pass the turn, and then you just attack them with flyers. Usually gets the job done because they have no flying blockers. Okay, so this is the final game on the draw. I did the same sideboard plan that I discussed earlier. So that is boarding in 3 Hydroblasts. I boarded out 1 Modern Age, 1 Deep Analysis, and 1 Ghostly Flicker. I decided that I was considering keeping Deep Analysis in the deck because my opponent showed me that they are going to board in a bunch of Red Blasts. And while Red Blasts I don't think is super good versus me, it can be good versus me if I board out all of my Deep Analysis. Like, Deep Analysis is the best way to beat counterspells. But the problem with the strategy is that Deep Analysis is just not very good versus my opponent's deck in general. So, like, if you get into this grindy game where you've stabilized the board and the opponent has Pyroblast and stuff, and you're both, like, top decking to see who can draw cards more, Deep Analysis is great. But in the games your opponent's trying to kill you, you have no time to spend 4 mana on a card draw, and you also don't have 3 life to spend on a card draw, so it's not very good. So I decided, I'll board it out like planned, and then I'll decide for game 3 on the play. If I see a bunch of Pyroblast, then maybe I'll board it back in. Okay, so this hand doesn't look great, right? On paper, like, I'm not really doing much here. I don't even have a turn 1 play, which is pretty common with this deck, to be honest. But this is 100% a keep for the reason that you can just cast your spells. Whatever you draw, you can cast it. And you have Snap to Ramp and some cheap cards that affect the board. So there is some inherent risk with this hand. Like, there's no card selection, no card draw, no anything. So if you just brick repeatedly, you're going to lose. But there's also inherent risk to going to 6. And so you definitely are going to keep these hands 100% of the time. They start with a Blast Runner. So this tells me a couple things. One, they don't have an artifact land. Well, honestly, I think that's the only thing it tells me. Yeah, also they don't have Kuldotha Rebirth on turn 2, most likely. Unless they have lands, Epicure, Kuldotha. But as it turns out, they don't have a second land. I think they mulligan to 6 this game. And this is like something that will happen with the mono red deck. So I play the fam, they bolt it. They attack. Back to me. They miss their land drop again, and at this point they're super far behind because I'm like sort of time walking them with these fams. And they only, okay, so now they hit the second land drop. Okay, so now this was an interesting decision. Magic Online played through it pretty quickly, but I could decide to play the Modern Age. The Modern Age is pretty good value here because I have these planes in my hand that I don't really need, and turning these into real cards is nice. However, it's really mana inefficient to make that play, so I decided to go play the Familiar, cast the Snap, and then cast a Mold Drifter, and then I'll play the Modern Age later. Just because it's mana inefficient. My draws were a Faithful and Arcane, which this is like the best hits off this. Because Arcane Snap with a I draw Ephemerate. These are just like the best draws possible. Okay, so play a Plains, cast Faithful, play Arcane, return Snap, and then I can cast Snap, and then what I decided to do is Ephemerate the Mold Drifter and then play the Modern Age to get rid of this Plains. At this point, the game's pretty much over. Like, my opponent's going to fight for a little bit longer, but they're pretty much just dead. And even on Drew Prismatic Strands to add insult to injury, so like a free card. So I Ephemerate the Archaeomancer. My opponent obviously can't Lightning Bolt the Archaeomancer in response to the Ephemerate because I have access to Prismatic Strands, but the Red Blast does work in this spot. But the nice thing is that it forces them to use a Red Blast on a creature that's in play rather than one that's on the stack. So that's definitely nice. Okay, so I loot away land, cast a Mold Drifter. I think it gets countered, but it's fine. There's more where that came from. And like because the board is stable, I'm gonna be able to top deck better than my opponent for the most part. Like the board is stable and I have way more mana in play, so like they're doing stuff, but it doesn't really matter. Um, and I draw an Archaeomancer, which is another great draw. So can't complain about my draws in this match at all. Return Ephemerate, and then I evoke Ephemerate, draw some cards. Decide to play the Mire, put an Archaeomancer on top. If they play a Relic or something and I don't want this Archaeomancer, I can always cycle it away. But they decided they were done and they conceded. So that was challenge win. I haven't. It's been a long time since I've actually won a Pauper challenge. I've split a couple, and gotten some second places and a lot of top eights, but it's been a while since I've actually gotten a proper first place. So that was fun. I don't know how useful this is exactly, but I figured I would go through these games because I was using a hand hider when I was streaming them live. I'm going to try to stream the Sunday challenges um, as much as I can, but no promises there. If you want to watch the matches live or whatever, the VODs will be on my Twitch for like 2 weeks. Although I will caution that there was a little bit of swearing, a little bit of expletives. But if you're okay with that and you're okay skipping around throughout the VOD, you can jump into my Twitch for the next couple weeks and watch that. But yeah, thank you for watching and have a good one.